the 25th episode of Better News Daily today, and I am still enjoying going through different books of the Bible together with you. Who knows how far we'll get in all of this, but it's looking more and more like we could get through every book of the Bible. Whoa. Today we are in the book of 1 Samuel, and if you remember from back on Tuesday, we were in the book of 2 Samuel, and that book had stories that all had to do with one person, King David. The book of 1 Samuel has two main characters in it. Can you guess quickly who they are? The first one is Samuel, duh. And the second one is King Saul, the first king of Israel. So I had more ideas for what to cover in this book than any other book so far. There are just so many great stories in 1 Samuel that I wanted to explore with you. But alas, I'll have to save some of those ideas for another time. Maybe I'll work one of them into a sermon somewhere along the way here. What I want to look at today with you is actually just one verse in the Bible. And before we get to that one verse, we need to set the scene. So let me first show you a picture and see if you can guess what story this is from 1 Samuel just by this picture. Can you tell what the story is? So if you grew up in a Christian home, you probably heard this story as a kid somewhere along the way. This is the story of little Samuel in the tabernacle, responding to the voice of God. You can see him there trying to get Eli's attention. Eli looks a lot like Santa Claus in this picture, I think. So let's just set this story up. You probably know the context, but just a quick refresher. So Samuel's mom, Hannah, was barren. And Hannah goes to the tabernacle and she prays that God will give her a child. And she even vows in her prayer that if God gives her a child, she will dedicate this child back to him in service. Well, Eli sees that Hannah is praying and thinks that she's drunk. Nice, Mr. Priest. Hannah explains the situation, and Eli tells her that her prayer will be answered. And it is. Hannah has a son and names him Samuel. Fun Easter egg. So yesterday we talked about what the Hebrew word for hearing was, Shema. And that word in Hebrew is part of what makes up Samuel's name, Shemuel, or God heard. God heard Hannah's prayer and gave her a son. Anyway, so Samuel is raised in the tabernacle, serving under Eli. And one night while sleeping in the tabernacle, he hears a voice call him. And he goes to Eli and asks what he needs. And Eli's like, I didn't say anything. Go back to bed. And this happens 2 more times before Eli finally realizes what's actually happening. And he tells Samuel to go back to bed, but if he hears the voice again, do you remember the famous words that Samuel is told to say? Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening. And what happens? God speaks. And do you remember what God actually says? That when we tell this story to kids, we often leave out this part. Growing up, I always thought that God in this moment was calling Samuel to be a prophet or something. Nope. God's message is that Eli and his house will be punished for the wickedness of his sons, and there's nothing they can do about it. Not exactly how we usually end that story. But anyways, really amazing story, right? Samuel hears the voice of God, and it begins this pattern in his life of directly communicating with God. But here's the verse that I want to look at today. This verse comes right at the beginning of this story about the night in the tabernacle. This is chapter 3, verse 1. Now the boy Samuel was ministering to the Lord in the presence of Eli. And the word of the Lord was rare in those days. There was no frequent vision. This is so cool. I don't know if you can relate, but I often struggle with how active and present God was in the Bible, yet today he seems so distant. But the Bible calls my bluff here. There were times in the Bible where God was very present and he did speak, yes. But there were also times where he wasn't and he didn't. The people in Samuel's day might have felt the way that many of us do today, that God doesn't work as actively as he used to back in the day. They might have read stories from the time of Moses and thought to themselves, "Oh, well, it'd be nice if God would do that nowadays, but we're in a different era now." I mean, doesn't that sound like how many people feel today? And I don't bring up this verse to say, hey, look, they weren't hearing from God either. Isn't that neat? No. Here's the good news. The word of the Lord was rare in those days. There was no frequent vision, yet God still spoke. This verse is such an important reminder. When I feel like I'm not hearing from God, or when I feel like He's not really present, I need to be patient. Because no matter how rare it might be to hear from God, God will still speak. So here's my question for today. Do you believe God still speaks? I mean this honestly. Don't just say yes because you know that's the right answer. Do you believe that today in 2020, God still speaks? If your answer is no, or I don't know, I think 1 Samuel 3:1 is a great reminder for you. Even at a time when God didn't seem to be speaking, He still spoke. But if your answer to this question is yes, I just want you to reflect on your life and ask yourself if you've made space for Him to speak. It's one thing to believe a worldview about God speaking, and it's another thing to live into that reality. If you believe that God still speaks, what do you do to hear His voice today? I want you to imagine that you are watching TV, and there's a lot going on in your home. The kitchen is noisy, there's a blender whirring, and pots are clanging. Your family is talking louder than you would like. The dog is running around, skittering on the floor. Your kids are fighting and throwing stuff, and you can't hear your program. So what do? Well, you pull out the remote and you turn the volume up so that you can hear. But then you see that the volume's already at the maximum on the TV. It can't get any louder. See, what needs to happen isn't that the volume of the TV needs to go up. It's that the surrounding noise needs to go down. I think the same is true in our relationship with God. God wants to speak. He wants to be involved in our lives. But we complain that He's not showing up, that we can't hear His voice. But what if God is speaking and we just have too much external noise in our lives to hear Him? What if the problem isn't that God needs to speak louder or more clearly to us, but that we need to clear out the clutter in our lives, and we need to mute the things that are drowning out His voice? And sometimes it's not just external noise that we need to mute, it's also internal noise. There was a study done in France, I believe, with opera singers. Here's a lovely photo of one. There were many who had become deaf to certain high notes. And the study showed that they had damaged their own eardrums because of the loudness of their own singing. This was dubbed the tinnitus effect. And I wonder if there are Christians who suffer from this very same thing. People who are deafened by the sound of their own voice. I wonder if some of us are unable to hear God because of the noise of our own voices, the sound of negative self-talk, or of grudges replaying in our minds, or of thoughts that are consumed with planning and stressing and dreaming. Some of us never quiet down our inner voices to ever be able to hear God's voice. I don't know where the volume needs to go down in your life, whether it's external noise or internal noise, or both. But as you work to mute things in your life, there's a powerful prayer that you should take with you. Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening. God's voice might come as a voice in the night, or through the words of another person, or as an impression deep down in your gut, or by the still small voice in a moment of prayer. However it comes, I believe that our God is a communicator, and I believe that he wants to communicate with you. Next week, we will be in a different book of the Bible, and my randomizer is busy picking one for Monday. Make sure that you tune in for our Sabbath worship service. Man, by the time I get to Friday, I never have enough oxygen to get the words out anymore. Sabbath worship service, 11 a.m. It's going to be here on this YouTube channel. If you'd like to tune in for that, we would love to have you. Philippians is the book that we will be in, and before I bungle another word, I should say goodbye. So thank you for joining us, and we'll see you on Monday.